For 10 years, I quietly paid for all my grandchildren's extravagant birthday parties and was always there when my son's family needed help. Until my daughter-in-law decided I wasn't prestigious enough to attend my own grandson's 10th birthday celebration. But the day she had to tell 60 guests that the luxury science museum venue had been mysteriously double-booked, her face turned whiter than her designer blazer. She had no idea that while I was knitting sweaters and baking cookies, I was also the anonymous donor who funded the entire children's wing they'd planned to celebrate in. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. I never imagined my golden years would be filled with such family drama. At 73, when most of my friends were enjoying peaceful retirement cruises and book clubs, I was navigating the treacherous waters of modern family politics. Looking back, I should have seen the warning signs years ago, but like most mothers and grandmothers, I chose to overlook the small slights in favor of family harmony. My name is Margaret Sullivan. For 42 years, I built and ran Sullivan's Fine Bakery in the heart of Oak Ridge, a charming suburb of Cleveland, Ohio. I started with nothing but my grandmother's sourdough starter and a small loan from the local credit union. By the time I retired, my bakery had 3 locations, 38 employees, and a reputation for the finest wedding cakes in the Midwest. Our signature Ukrainian Easter bread, Paska, had been featured in regional magazines, and our butter cookies shipped to customers in all 50 states. I loved every minute of building that business. The pre-dawn hours mixing dough and peaceful, solitude, the satisfaction of perfectly executed pastries, the joy on customers' faces when they took their first bite of something I had created with my own hands. I'd wake at 3:30 each morning, tiptoe past my sleeping family, and head to the original bakery location where I'd work alongside my early shift staff, my fingers moving with practiced precision as we prepared for the day ahead. By the time the doors opened at 6 to 5, the cases would be filled with fresh pastries, the air rich with the scent of bread and cinnamon. When I finally sold the business to my most talented baker, Maria Delgado, at age 68, I left with not just financial security, but a legacy I was proud of. Maria had started as a 19-year-old college student, working part-time to pay her tuition. She had shown such natural talent that I'd taken her under my wing, teaching her every recipe, every technique I'd developed over the decades. When she approached me about buying the business, it felt right, like passing a cherished family heirloom to a worthy successor. My husband Richard had passed away 10 years earlier, a sudden heart attack while tending his beloved vegetable garden. I'd found him among his tomato plants, trowel still in hand, face peaceful as though he'd simply decided to take a rest in the summer sunshine. We'd had one child, our son James, who had followed a more conventional path than my entrepreneurial journey. He'd become an accountant, married an ambitious pharmaceutical sales representative named Vanessa, and settled in Shaker Heights, an upscale neighborhood on the other side of Cleveland. James had always been a cautious child, methodical where I was intuitive, preferring structure and certainty to the risks I embraced when building my business. When Richard died, James worried about me continuing to work such long hours at the bakery. "Mom, you don't have to keep pushing yourself so hard," he'd say during our Sunday dinners. "You could sell now, live comfortably." But he didn't understand that the bakery wasn't just work to me. It was my passion, my identity, my connection to a heritage that stretched back through generations of women who had fed their families and communities with their own hands. James and Vanessa had 2 children, Tyler, now 10, and Sophia, 7. Beautiful, bright kids who I adored with every fiber of my being. Tyler had inherited Richard's thoughtful nature and my creative streak, a combination that made him excel at both mathematics and art, an unusual pairing that his teachers frequently commented on. Sophia was a natural athlete with a competitive drive that sometimes took her parents by surprise. Where it came from was no mystery to me. I recognized in her the same determination that had carried me through the lean early years of my business when conventional wisdom said a woman-owned bakery couldn't succeed in our conservative community. When James and Vanessa both pursued demanding careers, I was happy to help with childcare, school pickups, and doctor's appointments. I'd built my business while raising James alone after Richard died. I understood the challenges of balancing work and family. The bakery had taught me efficiency, patience, and the art of juggling multiple tasks without dropping any of them, skills that transferred perfectly to helping with my grandchildren. The early years were wonderful. James appreciated my help, and while Vanessa was always a bit distant, she was polite and seemed grateful for the practical support. I picked the children up from preschool 3 days a week, prepared healthy dinners that would be waiting when James and Vanessa returned from work, and never interfered with their parenting decisions, even when I disagreed with them. When Vanessa insisted on expensive language immersion programs for both children before they could even properly speak English, I kept my doubts to myself. When James wanted to enroll 4-year-old Tyler in competitive chess lessons that left the boy in tears of frustration, I gently suggested alternatives without undermining his authority. "Mom, you're a lifesaver," James would say, hugging me as he came through the door after a long day of client meetings. "I don't know how we'd manage without you." Those words warmed my heart, reminding me of the days when a small James would wrap his arms around my flour-covered apron, face pressing against my hip as he declared my chocolate chip cookies the best in the universe. The bond between us had weathered his teenage rebellion, his college years away, his early marriage when Vanessa had seemed determined to establish her primacy in his life. Through it all, we had maintained a connection that, while sometimes strained, remained fundamentally intact. The children thrived with the consistency of having their grandmother as a regular presence in their lives. Tyler inherited my passion for baking. Standing on a step stool in my kitchen by age 4, his small hands covered in flour as he learned to make the simple butter cookies my grandmother had taught me to make decades earlier. I'd watch him concentrate, tongue caught between his teeth, as he carefully pressed a fork into each dough ball, creating the crosshatch pattern that was our family tradition. Sophia was more like her father, methodical, precise, with a mind for numbers that impressed even her teachers. She approached our baking sessions like science experiments, insisting on measuring ingredients to the exact gram, recording her observations in a notebook she kept specifically for Grandma's kitchen research. Every year since they were born, I had organized and privately funded their birthday celebrations. Nothing extravagant at first, backyard parties with homemade cakes and simple games. But as the children grew and Vanessa's career advanced, the parties became increasingly elaborate. For Tyler's 7th birthday, I'd arranged a dinosaur-themed party complete with a paleontologist from the Natural History Museum who brought fossil specimens for the children to handle. For Sophia's 5th, we'd transformed the backyard into an enchanted forest with twinkling lights, a professional face painter, and a children's theater troupe performing fairy tales. I never told James or Vanessa that I was covering these expenses. James assumed the costs came from the generous family fun budget I had established for the grandchildren shortly after selling my business. Vanessa simply took it for granted that these celebrations materialized as planned, occasionally taking credit for aspects she had minimal involvement in. What mattered to me was seeing the joy on my grandchildren's faces, preserving the magic of childhood that passes all too quickly. "Grandma, this is the best birthday ever," Tyler had exclaimed. Last year, his face smeared with chocolate from the fountain I'd rented for his dinosaur party. "You always make everything special." Those moments, those genuine expressions of delight and appreciation, were worth every penny, every hour of planning, every effort to coordinate vendors and activities without letting James and Vanessa realize the extent of my involvement. I wasn't looking for credit or recognition. The children's happiness was enough. The dynamic began to shift when Vanessa received a significant promotion 3 years ago. becoming regional sales director for a major pharmaceutical company. The promotion came with a substantial salary increase, a company car, and most significantly, a new social circle that Vanessa seemed determined to impress. Suddenly, our modest family gatherings were replaced by networking events thinly disguised as social functions. New neighbors appeared at Thanksgiving dinner, not because they had nowhere else to go, but because they were potential business connections. James's quiet accounting practice was suddenly being marketed to Vanessa's wealthy colleagues. I watched the transformation with a mixture of pride and concern. On one hand, Vanessa's success was impressive, a testament to her intelligence and drive. On the other, the values that had anchored our family seemed to be shifting beneath our feet, replaced by a preoccupation with status and appearance that made me increasingly uncomfortable. And my role began to change as well. Rather than the grandmother who contributed her time, experience, and silent financial support, I became something of an embarrassment, a reminder of the family's less polished roots. The first time I noticed this shift was at a dinner party Vanessa hosted for her new boss. I'd arrived early to help with preparations, bringing a tray of my special Ukrainian pastries that had always been popular at family gatherings. "Oh," Vanessa said, her smile tightening as she took the tray. "Thank you, Margaret, but I've ordered catering from Bellissimo's. Perhaps we can serve these another time." The pastries, hand-rolled dough filled with sweet cheese and topped with cherries I'd preserved myself, disappeared into the kitchen, replaced by bland but elegantly presented hors d'oeuvres that cost 4 times as much and contained half the love. "Mom, would you mind not mentioning the bakery when the Richardsons come over?" James asked hesitantly, before another dinner party several weeks later. "Vanessa thought maybe you could say you were in food service management instead." I raised an eyebrow but said nothing. I had never been ashamed of building a successful business from scratch, of the years spent with flour-dusted hands and a sore back from standing at the ovens. Sullivan's Bakery had put James through college without a single student loan, had funded family vacations and his first car, had provided security when other families struggled during economic downturns. But I loved my son and wanted him to be happy, so I played along. That night, when asked about my career by Vanessa's new colleagues, I smiled and spoke vaguely about overseeing operations for a local food business, watching the relief spread across my son's face. The requests continued, small but significant adjustments to my identity to make me more palatable to Vanessa's new social circle. My Ukrainian heritage, which had informed the specialty breads that became Sullivan's Bakery's signature offerings, was downplayed. The family recipes that had sustained us through generations, that connected us to relatives long gone, but not forgotten, were replaced by trendy fusion cuisine that Vanessa found more impressive for her guests. My modest wardrobe was subtly criticized until I found myself shopping for clothes I didn't particularly like, just to avoid Vanessa's disapproving glances. "Margaret, we're going to the country club on Sunday," she would text. "Perhaps something a bit more current?" The dresses I chose were never quite right. Too colorful, too conservative, too ethnic, too something. Eventually, I took to asking for explicit approval before family gatherings, a humiliating practice that reduced me to a teenager seeking permission rather than a grown woman with decades of life experience. "Grandma, why does Mom say you need to dress differently when her work friends come over?" Tyler asked me one afternoon as I helped him with his science project. Out of the mouths of babes, as they say. "Your mom wants to make a good impression," I answered carefully. "Sometimes. People judge others by how they look, not who they are. It's not right, but it happens." Tyler considered this, his small brow furrowed in concentration. "I think your clothes are fine, and your cookies are way better than the fancy ones Mom orders from that expensive place." I hugged him then, grateful for the honesty of children, before they learn to filter their thoughts through the lens of social expectation. "That's because my cookies have a secret ingredient," I told him with a wink. "What is it?" he asked, eyes wide. Love, I answered, tapping his nose gently. No, fancy bakery can replicate that. What James and Vanessa didn't know, what no one knew except my attorney and financial advisor, was that the sale of Sullivan's Bakery had left me far more comfortable than anyone suspected. I had built the business methodically over 4 decades, reinvesting profits, expanding strategically, and developing a wholesale division that supplied restaurants throughout the Midwest. The property values in our once modest neighborhood had skyrocketed as Cleveland experienced an urban renaissance, making the real estate portion of the sale particularly lucrative. When I finally sold to Maria, the final valuation had surprised even me. Martin Holloway, my attorney since Richard's death, had structured the sale to minimize taxes and maximize long-term security. "You're sitting on a gold mine, Margaret," he told me as we reviewed the final paperwork. "You could buy that villa in Tuscany you're always talking about and still have plenty left over." But the villa remained a dream, a someday plan that never quite materialized. Instead, I lived modestly and focused on using my unexpected wealth in quieter ways. Beyond supporting my grandchildren's celebrations, I had made anonymous donations to causes I believed in. The children's reading room at the Oak Ridge Public Library bore a plaque thanking an anonymous local business owner. The scholarship fund at the Culinary Institute that had helped Maria further her education received annual contributions from a donor who requested no recognition. And the science wing at the Cleveland Natural History Museum, Tyler's favorite place in the world, had been partially funded by a donation in memory of Richard, who had loved taking James there on weekends when he was a boy. The museum donation had been particularly meaningful. Richard had been a science teacher before his heart condition forced early retirement, his passion for the natural world infectious to anyone who spent time with him. When the museum's development director approached me about contributing to their expansion campaign, I'd immediately thought of the hours Richard had spent with James, patiently explaining everything from dinosaur migration patterns to the life cycle of monarchs. The substantial donation had been made under a simple condition: that a small plaque near the hands-on geology exhibit would read, "In memory of Richard Sullivan, who taught us to look closer." No mention of the amount, no grand gestures, just a quiet acknowledgement of a man who had found wonder in the world and shared it generously. I lived simply in the same 3-bedroom ranch house Richard and I had purchased when James was a toddler. The kitchen had been renovated, a professional-grade oven and marble countertops my one concession to luxury, but otherwise, the house remained much as it had been when Richard was alive. I drove a 5-year-old Subaru, wore clothes from department stores rather than boutiques, and saved my splurges for travel. Quiet, solo trips to Europe where I could explore bakeries and pastry shops, gathering ideas I still shared with Maria for the business that would always hold a piece of my heart. These trips were my secret indulgence, carefully scheduled around family obligations and presented to James and Vanessa as modest senior tour packages rather than the curated culinary explorations they actually were. Last year's 3 weeks in the French countryside, studying with a master baker in a 300-year-old village, had been described to them as a senior's bus tour of Paris. Technically not a lie, as I had indeed taken a bus at one point and had visited Paris briefly. The deception bothered me, but experience had taught me that transparency would only lead to uncomfortable questions and subtle disapproval. My financial advisor, Paul Berenson, had been urging me for years to enjoy more of my wealth. "Margaret, you've earned this," he would say during our quarterly meetings, his silver-rimmed glasses sliding down his nose as he reviewed my accounts. "The business has been sold for 5 years now. You've set aside more than enough for James." And the grandchildren. When are you going to do something for yourself? Something visible? Something significant? I would smile and assure him that my simple life was exactly what I wanted. The truth was more complicated. After 40 years of 4 a.m. wake-ups and 16-hour workdays, the quiet rhythm of retirement suited me. I didn't need luxury or recognition, but I did need to feel valued, to be treated with basic dignity and respect, something that was becoming increasingly rare in my interactions with Vanessa. "You know, Margaret," Paul said during our last meeting, closing my portfolio with a decisive snap, "money isn't just about purchasing power. It's about agency, the freedom to make choices on your own terms. You've earned that freedom. Don't let anyone take it from you." His words had stayed with me, resonating in unexpected moments, when Vanessa forgot to invite me to Sophia's dance recital until the day before, when James called to cancel our standing Sunday brunch because something came up with Vanessa's work, when I arrived at their house for a planned visit, only to discover they had decided to go to the lake house owned by Vanessa's new colleague. The final straw, the moment that forced me to reassess everything, came 6 weeks before Tyler's 10th birthday. I had arrived at their house for my regular Wednesday afternoon with the children, only to find Vanessa hosting a lunch for what appeared to be colleagues from her company. The dining room table was set with china I'd never seen before, and the house smelled of catered food rather than Vanessa's usual quick prep meals. "Oh, Margaret," Vanessa said when she spotted me in the entryway, her surprise quickly masked with a tight smile. "I completely forgot you were coming today. The children have activities after school. They won't be home until 6. This was news. To me. Wednesday afternoons had been grandma time since Tyler started kindergarten, a sacred block on our calendars where I would pick the children up from school, help with homework, and engage in craft projects or baking sessions that gave James and Vanessa a few extra hours to focus on work. "I thought Tyler had Science Olympiad on Thursdays," I said, confused, "and Sophia's ballet is always on Monday." Vanessa's smile didn't reach her eyes. "We've adjusted their schedules. James was supposed to let you know." From the dining room, a woman's voice called out, "Vanessa, are you coming back? We were just discussing the charity gala." Vanessa glanced over her shoulder, then back at me. "I need to get back to my guests. Maybe call next time before coming over?" I nodded, swallowing the hurt that rose in my throat. "Of course. Sorry to interrupt." As I turned to leave, I heard the woman ask, "Who was that? Your housekeeper?" And Vanessa's response, not quite quiet enough, "No, just my mother-in-law. She gets confused about schedules sometimes." Just her mother-in-law. Gets confused. As if I were suffering from dementia rather than following the schedule that had been in place for years. As if my time had no value, my feelings no importance. As if the woman who had helped raise her children, who had silently funded their extravagant parties and activities, who had stepped back to let Vanessa take credit for my efforts, was nothing more than an inconvenient elderly relative who couldn't keep track of days. The words stung with a particular sharpness because they attacked the core of who I was, the organized, efficient businesswoman who had run a complex operation with dozens of employees, hundreds of orders, and exacting production schedules for decades. I had built my reputation on reliability and attention to detail. To be dismissed as confused was not just hurtful but fundamentally untrue. I drove home in silence. No radio, no phone calls, just the sound of my own breathing as I processed what had happened. By the time I pulled into my driveway, a decision had crystallized in my mind. Something needed to change. I would always love my grandchildren, would do anything for them. But I would no longer accept being treated as an inconvenience, an embarrassment, or worst of all, just a mother-in-law who could be dismissed without thought. That evening, I called Paul Berenson. "Paul," I said when he answered, "remember how you've been telling me to do something for myself? I think I'm ready to have that conversation." His delight was audible. "About time, Margaret. What did you have in mind? That villa in Tuscany you mentioned? A cruise? Your own apartment in New York for those bakery research trips?" "Not exactly," I replied. "I need your help with something a bit more complicated." Explained my idea. A plan that would allow me to maintain my relationship with my grandchildren while establishing clear boundaries with James and Vanessa. A way to reclaim my dignity without punishing the children for their parents' behavior. It's risky, Paul cautioned after hearing me out. It could backfire, create more tension instead of resolution. I know, I acknowledged, but I've spent my entire life playing it safe, putting others first. At 73, I think I've earned the right to stand up for myself, even if it's uncomfortable. What I didn't tell Paul, couldn't quite articulate even to myself, was the deep hurt behind my decision. It wasn't just Vanessa's dismissive attitude or James's increasing distance. It was the gradual erosion of my identity, the subtle message that the woman who had built a business from nothing, who had raised a son alone after being widowed at 48, who had supported their family in countless seen and unseen ways, was now an inconvenience to be managed rather than a person to be respected. That hurt had been simmering for years. Now it would finally lead to action. And the catalyst would be Tyler's upcoming birthday, the celebration I had already quietly arranged and paid for months in advance at the Cleveland Natural History Museum in the very science wing that bore Richard's memorial plaque. Sometimes the kindest souls harbor the most effective lessons when finally pushed too far. I was about to demonstrate exactly that. The weeks following my decision to take action were deceptively normal. I continued my routine visits with the grandchildren, though I noticed Vanessa had rescheduled several of our standing arrangements to times when she knew I had my weekly bridge club or volunteer shifts at the library. It was a subtle form of control, creating conflicts that would reduce my time with Tyler and Sophia without having to directly tell me I wasn't welcome. James called less frequently, our Sunday brunches now a monthly occurrence rather than weekly. When I asked about Tyler's upcoming birthday, he was evasive. "Vanessa's handling all the details this year, Mom," he said, his voice carrying that slightly strained quality I'd come to recognize as discomfort. "She's got some big plans." "I'd be happy to help," I offered, knowing full well that I had already done more than help. "I've arranged the last 9 birthdays, after all." "I know, and we appreciate it," James replied quickly. "But Vanessa wants to take this one on herself. She's got some contacts through work that are making it really special." The irony of this statement would have been amusing if it weren't so hurtful. The contacts he referred to were almost certainly the museum administrators I'd been working with for months to arrange Tyler's celebration. But I simply said, "That's wonderful. 10 is a big milestone. He deserves something special." What I didn't mention was that 6 months earlier, I had contacted the Cleveland Natural History Museum's events coordinator, Diane Levinson, to book their new interactive dinosaur exhibition space for Tyler's birthday. The space was normally reserved for corporate events and fundraisers, with a rental fee that would make most parents balk. But as one of the anonymous benefactors of the science wing, I had both the means and the relationships to secure it for a children's party. "Mrs. Sullivan, we'd be delighted to host your grandson's celebration," Diane had told me. "After everything you've done for the museum, it's the least we can do." I had spent weeks planning with the museum staff to create an experience Tyler would never forget. A private tour of the fossil collection normally closed to the public, a custom dinosaur-themed cake from Cleveland's most exclusive bakery, a noted paleontologist flying in from Chicago to give a child-friendly talk about recent discoveries in the field. Small touches that would make the day magical not just for Tyler, but for his friends as well. Personalized lab coats with each child's name, authentic excavation tools they could take home, professional photographs documenting the day. All of it arranged in the wing bearing Richard's memorial plaque, a connection to the grandfather Tyler had never met, but whose love of science lived on in the boy's boundless curiosity. Now, according to James, Vanessa was handling all the details and taking credit for arrangements she knew nothing about. It stung, but I'd grown accustomed to such slights over the years. What I didn't yet know was that this birthday would involve far more than the usual appropriation of my efforts. 3 weeks before the party, I received a text message from Vanessa that would prove to be the catalyst for everything that followed. It arrived on a Tuesday morning as I was preparing a shopping list for the week. "Margaret, we need to discuss Tyler's birthday plans. Can you meet for coffee tomorrow at 10? The formality of the message, coupled with the unusual request for a one-on-one meeting, set alarm bells ringing. Vanessa and I rarely met without the children present, and when we did, it was typically in the context of family gatherings with James as a buffer. Still, I replied with a simple, "Yes, see you at Westlake Cafe," our usual meeting spot halfway between our homes. The cafe was busy when I arrived the next morning, but Vanessa had secured a table in the back corner, partially screened by a decorative divider that offered some privacy from the other patrons. She was dressed in her work attire, a tailored navy suit, subtle pearl earrings, her dark hair pulled back in a sleek chignon. The image of professional success. "Margaret, thank you for coming," she said as I slid into the chair opposite her. No hug, not even a warm smile, just the polite acknowledgement one might offer a business associate. "Of course," I replied, signaling to the server for my usual tea. "What's on your mind?" Vanessa took a careful sip of her latte before setting it down with precision. "It's about Tyler's birthday celebration. As James probably mentioned, we're having it at the Natural History Museum." He did mention that. It sounds wonderful. Tyler loves that museum. Yes, he's very excited. It's going to be quite an event. She paused, fingers nervously adjusting her napkin. "We've invited some important people. Dr. Callahan, the head of pediatric medicine at Cleveland General, the Westbrooks from the hospital board, several of the partners from James's firm." I nodded, waiting for her to get to the point. This sounded like the usual status-focused guest list Vanessa preferred these days. "The thing is," she continued, her voice lowering slightly, "this is a really important networking opportunity for both of us. Dr. Callahan rarely attends private functions, and the Westbrooks could be instrumental in James landing the hospital's accounting contract." "I'm sure Tyler will charm them all," I said, still not seeing where this was heading. "He's such a personable boy." Vanessa's perfectly manicured hand reached across the table, stopping just short of touching mine. A gesture of false compassion that sent a chill of premonition through me. "Margaret, I think it would be best if you didn't attend the party itself." The words hung in the air between us, so unexpected that for a moment I thought I'd misheard. "Excuse me?" "It's nothing personal," she hurried to add, though of course, it was entirely personal. "It's just that we're trying to present a certain image, and I'm concerned that some of your stories about the old bakery days might not create the impression we're hoping for." I sat very still, my tea forgotten. "You don't want me at my own grandson's birthday party because I might mention that I owned a business?" "It's not just that," Vanessa sighed, as if I were being deliberately obtuse. "Last time you were around Dr. Callahan, you spent 20 minutes telling him about Ukrainian Easter bread traditions. And when the Westbrooks were over for dinner, you kept offering to teach their daughters how to make pierogies. I didn't realize sharing family traditions was embarrassing," I said quietly. "It's not that it's embarrassing exactly." Vanessa's tone suggested it was precisely that. "It's just not the sophisticated impression we need to create. These people expect a certain level of refinement." The irony was almost laughable. Vanessa, whose idea of cultural sophistication was ordering expensive wines she couldn't pronounce correctly, was concerned that my decades of craftsmanship and cultural heritage would somehow embarrass her in front of people she was desperate to impress. "I see," I said, my voice steady despite the hurt blooming in my chest. "And what does James think about this arrangement?" A flicker of discomfort crossed her face. "He understands the importance of these connections for our family's future." Translation: she had convinced my son to exclude his own mother from his child's celebration for the sake of impressing people whose opinion of them was based entirely on appearances. We thought, Vanessa continued, seemingly encouraged by my calm reaction, that you could have a special grandmother celebration with Tyler the weekend after. Something small at your house, perhaps? You could bake with him. He always enjoys. That? The dismissal was so complete, so calculated, that it momentarily took my breath away. I was being relegated to a secondary celebration, hidden away like an embarrassing family secret, while Vanessa used my grandson's birthday, the celebration I had arranged and paid for, as a networking event to advance her social climbing. Took a slow, deliberate sip of my tea, using the moment to gather my thoughts. Part of me wanted to tell her exactly what I thought of her transparent manipulation, to reveal that the party she was so proudly claiming credit for had been entirely my creation. But another part, the strategic businesswoman who had successfully navigated 4 decades of challenges, recognized an opportunity. I understand, I said finally, setting down my cup. You're right that these connections are important for your family's future. I wouldn't want to interfere with that. Relief flooded Vanessa's face, her shoulders visibly relaxing. I'm so glad. You understand, Margaret. This really is what's best for everyone. Of course, I smiled, a plan already forming in my mind. Will you at least tell Tyler that I wanted to be there? I'd hate for him to think I chose not to come. Definitely, she assured me, though I doubted she would. We'll tell him you weren't feeling well. At your age, no one will question it. At my age, another casual diminishment, another erasure of my agency and capabilities. I nodded as if this were perfectly reasonable, as if I weren't 73 but 103, barely able to leave my home. Well, I should get going, Vanessa said, gathering her designer handbag. I have a meeting with the museum coordinator at 11. So much to finalize for this party. I'm sure it will be wonderful, I replied. Tyler deserves the very best, as I watched her leave, her confident stride carrying her through the cafe without a backward glance. I felt something shift inside me. The hurt was still there, a deep ache that comes from being rejected by your own family. But alongside it was a newfound resolve. I had spent years accommodating Vanessa's ambitions, James's passivity, their combined willingness to use my resources, while minimizing my presence. No more. I pulled out my phone and made 2 calls. The first was to Paul Berenson, my financial advisor. Paul, I said when he answered, remember that plan we discussed? I need to put it in motion immediately. You certain? He asked, concern evident in his voice. This could change your relationship with James and Vanessa significantly. I'm certain, I replied. It's already changed. They just don't know it yet. The second call was to Diane Levinson at the museum. Diane, it's Margaret Sullivan. I need to make some adjustments to my grandson's birthday arrangements. Of course, Mrs. Sullivan. Is everything all right? There's been a slight change of plans, I said, my voice steady. I'd like to discuss some options. An hour later, I sat in Diane's office at the museum, explaining the delicate situation. As a professional who had worked with donors for decades, she understood the complex family dynamics at play. So you're telling me that your daughter-in-law has no idea you arranged and paid for this entire event? She asked, eyes wide with disbelief. None whatsoever, I confirmed. She believes she's working with the museum through her professional connections. Diane shook her head. Well, that explains a lot. She came in yesterday acting as though she was doing us a favor by hosting her event here. She asked for several costly additions to the package, mentioned her close relationship with the board, and suggested we should be offering her a discount, given her husband's position as an accountant for several prominent Cleveland families. I wasn't surprised. This was Vanessa's standard approach: leverage any connection, however tenuous, to extract maximum benefit while giving minimum appreciation. And now she doesn't want you, our actual benefactor, to attend? Diane continued, indignation rising in her voice. That's outrageous. It is, I agreed. But I'm not going to create a scene or force my presence where it's unwanted. Instead, I'd like to explore other options. Together, we developed a plan that would protect Tyler from disappointment while also establishing clear consequences for James and Vanessa's behavior. The museum would honor the original arrangements. The space was reserved, the paleontologist booked, the special touches ready to make a 10-year-old boy's birthday magical. But there would be some adjustments to reflect the new reality of my relationship with my son and his wife. "Are you absolutely sure about this?" Diane asked as we finalized the details. "It's within your rights as the donor and the person who contracted these services, but it will certainly create some complications." "I'm sure," I said firmly. "Sometimes complications are necessary for growth." As I left the museum, I felt lighter than I had in years. The anxiety that had plagued me throughout my relationship with Vanessa, the constant worry about saying the wrong thing, wearing the wrong clothes, somehow embarrassing her in front of her precious social connections, had dissipated. In its place was a calm certainty that I was finally standing up for myself, reclaiming the dignity that had been slowly eroded over years of subtle diminishment. I drove home through the familiar streets of Cleveland, passing the original Sullivan's bakery location, now a thriving business under Maria's management. The sign still bore my name, a reminder of the legacy I had built through hard work, determination, and a refusal to be underestimated. Somehow, along the way, I had forgotten those qualities in my relationship with James and Vanessa, had allowed myself to be reduced to a convenient grandmother and occasional checkbook. No more. By the time I pulled into my driveway, the sun was beginning to set, casting long shadows across the garden Richard had loved so dearly. I sat for a moment in the quiet car, thinking about what lay ahead. There would be anger, confusion, perhaps even temporary estrangement from James. But there would also eventually be understanding, or at least consequences for actions that had been too long without them. I had raised my son to be kind, to value family, to respect the sacrifices of others. Somewhere along the way, under Vanessa's influence and his own desire for a more prestigious life than his Baker mother had provided, he had forgotten those lessons. Perhaps it was time for a refresher course. Inside, I made myself a cup of tea and sat at my kitchen table, surrounded by the photographs of a life well lived. James as a toddler in the bakery, flour dusting his chubby cheeks. Richard and me on our 20th anniversary. Tyler and Sophia at various ages, their faces alight with the joy of childhood. My family, complicated and imperfect, but still mine. I picked up my phone and sent a text to James. "We need to talk about Tyler's birthday. Call me when you can." The reply came almost immediately. "Vanessa mentioned she spoke with you. Thanks for understanding, Mom. We'll make it up to you. Make it up to me." As if exclusion from my grandson's celebration I had created and funded, was a minor inconvenience that could be soothed with platitudes. I didn't respond. Some conversations needed to happen face to face, and this would definitely be one of them. Instead, I opened my email and confirmed the arrangements Paul and I had made, a series of financial adjustments that would become relevant very soon, as James and Vanessa discovered the true cost of treating family as disposable. Tyler's birthday was 10 days away. 10 days for me to finalize my plans, to prepare for the fallout, to strengthen my resolve. 10 days until Vanessa's carefully cultivated image of control and social sophistication would face a very public challenge. And I, the embarrassing Baker grandmother from the wrong side of Cleveland, would finally reclaim my place, not as an accessory to be utilized when convenient and hidden when inconvenient, but as a woman of substance who demanded to be treated with the respect she had earned through a lifetime of hard work and sacrifice. The game was about to change, and I was finally ready to play by my own rules. The 7 days that followed my coffee meeting with Vanessa were deceptively quiet. On the surface, life continued as usual. I attended my bridge club, volunteered at the library's children's reading hour, and spoke with Tyler and Sophia on their father's phone during our scheduled calls. If the conversations were slightly strained, if James seemed eager to end them sooner than usual, I pretended not to notice. Behind this veneer of normalcy, however, was a flurry of activity. Paul Berenson and I had daily conversations, finalizing the financial restructuring we'd planned. Martin Holloway, my attorney, prepared the necessary documents with his usual thoroughness. And Diane Levinson at the Cleveland Natural History Museum kept me updated on Vanessa's increasingly demanding interactions with the museum staff. She called again today, Diane reported during one of our check-ins. Now she wants the paleontologist to wear a tie that matches her dress. She sent a fabric swatch to the office. I couldn't help but laugh at the absurdity. And what did you tell her? That Dr. Whitaker is an acclaimed scientist who has appeared on National Geographic and the Discovery Channel, and that we don't generally dictate his wardrobe choices. Diane's dry tone conveyed her growing exasperation. She didn't take it well. No, Vanessa wouldn't have taken that well at all. In her world, everyone was a supporting player in the production of her life, expected to follow her direction without question. She also asked about upgrading the catering, Diane continued. When I explained that the menu had already been finalized and paid for, she insisted on speaking to the actual person in charge, not just an events coordinator. The irony of Vanessa not realizing she was speaking to the museum's senior director of development, a woman who had raised millions for the institution and managed relationships with the city's most prominent families, would have been amusing under different circumstances. Did you tell her who you are? I asked. No, Diane replied. I thought it better to maintain the fiction for now as you requested. But Margaret, I have to say, this situation is becoming increasingly uncomfortable for our staff. I understand, I acknowledged, and I appreciate your patience. After Saturday, things will be much clearer. Saturday, Tyler's birthday, approached with the inevitability of an incoming tide. 3 days before the event, James finally called, his voice carrying that forced cheerfulness that told me he was uncomfortable even before he spoke. Mom, I wanted to check in. Vanessa said you two had a good talk about Tyler's party. Did she? I kept my tone neutral, giving him room to reveal how much he actually knew about our conversation. Yes, and I just want to say I appreciate your understanding. This event is really important for my career, and having the Westbrooks there could mean landing the hospital account. So that was the version he'd been given, that my exclusion was a mutual agreement based on the business potential of the party. Not that I'd been directly told my presence would embarrass them in front of their important guests. James, I said carefully, do you think your father would have excluded his mother from a family celebration for the sake of a business opportunity? The silence on the line stretched uncomfortably long. That's different, Mom, he finally replied, his defensiveness evident. Dad was in a different position. The accounting world is very relationship-driven now, and impressions matter. And what impression would having your mother there create? I pressed gently. Another pause. It's not. Vanessa just thought, with the particular guests we have coming. He was fumbling, unable to say directly what his wife had told me so bluntly, that my working-class background and Ukrainian heritage were embarrassments to be hidden away. It's all right, James, I said, rescuing him from his stammering. I understand perfectly. Some things are more important than family traditions. No, that's not what Tyler called me yesterday, I continued, changing the subject. He's very excited about the museum party, particularly about seeing the private fossil collection. Yes, he hasn't stopped talking about it, James said, relief evident in his voice at the shift in topic. Vanessa really pulled out all the stops for this one. I bit back the instinctive correction that I, not Vanessa, had arranged the behind-the-scenes tour months ago. calling in a favor from the curator who had been a regular customer at Sullivan's Bakery for decades. Instead, I simply said, "It sounds wonderful. He deserves a special celebration." "He does," James agreed. "And Mom, we will do something with you the weekend after. Maybe you could make those chocolate chip cookies he loves? The ones with the sea salt on top." And there it was, the consolation prize. A quiet, hidden-away celebration where my presence wouldn't embarrass anyone, where I could bake treats that would be enthusiastically consumed but never acknowledged in the carefully curated social media posts Vanessa would share with her network. "We'll see," I said noncommittally. "I may have plans that weekend." Plans? The surprise in his voice revealed how rarely he considered that I might have a life beyond my availability to his family. "What kind of plans?" "Nothing definite yet," I replied. "But at my age, I'm learning not to put things off too long. You never know how much time you have left." It was a subtle guilt trip, but an effective one. James's tone immediately shifted to concern. "Mom, is everything okay? Your health is good, right?" "Everything's fine, James," I assured him. "I'm just becoming more mindful of how I spend my time, and with whom." After we hung up, I sat for a long time looking at a photograph on my mantel. James at his college graduation, flanked by Richard and me, all of us beaming with pride. My hardworking, honest son, who had never wanted for anything, whose education had been fully funded by the bakery his mother had built with her own hands. When had he become a man who would exclude that same mother for the approval of people, like the Westbrooks? The answer, I knew, wasn't simple. It wasn't just Vanessa's influence, though that played a significant role. It was also the subtle but persistent message that permeates certain social circles, that working with your hands is somehow less dignified than working with numbers or words, that an accent or ethnic tradition is something to overcome rather than celebrate, that the trappings of success matter more than the character that earned it. Somewhere along the way, James had absorbed that message, had begun to see his parents' simple but honest life as something to transcend rather than honor. And I, in my desire to support his happiness, had enabled that perspective by staying quietly in the background, never reminding him of the foundation upon which his opportunities had been built. Well, that was about to change. The day before Tyler's birthday celebration, I received an unexpected visitor. I was in my garden, tending to the tomato plants Richard had loved so dearly, when a car pulled into my driveway. To my surprise, Tyler climbed out, followed by James. "Grandma!" Tyler called, running toward me with the unself-conscious enthusiasm of a child not yet conditioned to hide his affection. He wrapped his arms around my waist, his head now reaching my shoulder. When had he grown so tall? "Tyler, what a wonderful surprise," I said, hugging him tightly before looking up at James with a questioning expression. "He wanted to see you before the big day," James explained, hands shoved awkwardly in his pockets. "He was upset when he heard you weren't coming tomorrow." "Mom said you're sick," Tyler said, pulling back to study my face with concern. "But you don't look sick." I glanced at James, who had the grace to look uncomfortable. "I'm not sick, sweetheart," I told Tyler. "But sometimes grown-ups have complicated reasons for the decisions they make." "Then why aren't you coming?" he persisted. "I told Mom I want you there. You always make my birthdays special." Out of the mouths of babes. I knelt down, ignoring the protest from my knees, to look Tyler directly in the eye. "Your birthday will be wonderful, I promise, and we'll celebrate together very soon. But it won't be the same without you," he insisted, with the unassailable logic of a child. "You've been at every birthday I've ever had." I felt tears threatening and blinked them back. "Sometimes things change, Tyler. But my love for you never will." I reached into my pocket and pulled out a small box wrapped in silver paper. "Here, a little early birthday gift." He accepted it eagerly, the momentary sadness forgotten in the excitement of an unexpected present. "Can I open it now?" "Of course." He tore away the paper to reveal a small velvet box. Inside was a pocket watch, not a toy, but a real high-quality timepiece with his initials engraved on the case. "This was your grandfather's," I explained as he turned it over in his hands with unusual care for a 10-year-old. "My father gave it to him when we got married, and he always said it should go to his grandson when the time was right. I think 10 is the perfect age." "It's real?" Tyler asked, awe in his voice. "A real grown-up watch?" "Very real," I confirmed. "Over 100 years old. It still keeps perfect time, just like your grandfather made sure it did. He wound it every morning at precisely 7 o'clock. Tyler carefully opened the case to reveal the watch face, its Roman numerals and delicate hands, a testament to craftsmanship from another era. "I'll take care of it forever," he promised solemnly. "I know you." "Will, sweetheart." James, watching this exchange, appeared genuinely moved. "Mom, that's Dad's watch? I didn't even know you still had it." "There are many things I've preserved over the years," I said meaningfully. "Family heirlooms, traditions, memories, they matter, even when we sometimes forget that they do." He had the decency to look abashed. "Mom, about tomorrow?" "Why don't we go inside?" I interrupted, not wanting to have this conversation in front of Tyler. "I just baked some cookies this morning, and I think there might be some lemonade in the refrigerator." In the kitchen, while Tyler happily devoured chocolate chip cookies and practiced opening and closing his new watch, James leaned against the counter and spoke in a low voice. "I want you to know this wasn't my idea," he said, "excluding you from the party. Vanessa gets these ideas in her head, and sometimes it's easier to go along than to argue." It was as close to an apology as he was likely to offer, but it wasn't. Enough. Not anymore. "James," I said quietly, "do you remember when you were 12 and Joey Markham didn't invite you to his birthday because his new friends from the private school thought the public school kids weren't cool enough?" He frowned. "Vaguely. That was a long time ago." "Your father drove you to the toy store that morning and let you pick out the best gift in the place. That remote control car Joey had been talking about for months. Then he had you wrap it, and took you to Joey's house right at the start of the party." I smiled at the memory. "When Joey's mother answered the door, your father said loud enough for everyone to hear, James wanted to make sure Joey got his present, even though the invitation must have gotten lost in the mail." James's expression softened. "I'd forgotten. That. Dad was pretty smooth when he wanted to be." "Joey's mother was mortified," I continued. "She insisted we stay, made a big show of how there must have been a mix-up. You ended up having a great time, and Joey learned an important lesson about loyalty and treating people with respect." The parallel to our current situation hung unspoken between us. "Mom, it's not the same," James sighed. "We're not 12. This is about business relationships that could secure our family's financial future." "Is it?" I challenged gently. "Or is it about being embarrassed by where you come from? By the bakery that paid for your education, the parents who worked with their hands so you could work with numbers?" He had no answer for that, his gaze sliding away from mine to fix on Tyler, happily oblivious to the tension as he arranged cookies in a careful pattern on his plate. "I should get him home," James said finally. "Vanessa will be wondering where we are. Tomorrow's going to be a busy day." "Indeed it will," I agreed with more certainty than he could possibly understand. After they left, I made one final call to Diane at the museum. "Everything in place for tomorrow?" I asked. "Just as you requested," she confirmed. "Though I have to admit, I'm a little nervous about how this will play out." "That makes two of us," I admitted. "But sometimes a lesson needs to be learned, even if the teaching of it is uncomfortable." I spent the evening in quiet preparation, not for the party I wouldn't be attending, but for what would come after. I selected my outfit for the following day with unusual care. a tailored teal dress I'd purchased during my last trip to New York but had never worn, deemed too bold by Vanessa's subtle fashion policing. I laid out my mother's pearl earrings and the simple gold bracelet Richard had given me on our last anniversary before his death. I was dressing not for the party, but for the aftermath, for the moment when the careful narrative Vanessa had constructed would finally unravel. The morning of Tyler's birthday dawned clear and bright, the October sky a brilliant blue that reminded me of Richard's eyes. I sent my grandson a text message wishing him the happiest of birthdays, telling him I was sending him the biggest grandma hug and that his special day would be magical. He responded almost immediately with a string of heart emojis and, "Thanks." "Grandma, I wish you were coming." At precisely 11:30 a.m., the time I knew Vanessa and James would be at the museum overseeing the final party preparations, I received the call I had been both expecting and dreading. "Mom," James's voice was tight with tension. "We have a situation here at the museum. The events coordinator is saying there's been some kind of mix-up with our reservation." "Oh?" I kept my tone neutral. "What kind of mix-up?" "They're claiming we don't have the space reserved for today, that it's only a tentative booking pending final confirmation, which apparently never came." The stress in his voice was escalating. "Vanessa is beside herself. The guests start arriving in less than an hour, and the museum is saying we might have to relocate to a much smaller space that won't accommodate everyone." "That's concerning," I said. "Have you spoken with the person in charge, not just the events coordinator?" "Vanessa is demanding to see them now. She's insisting there's been a terrible mistake, that she confirmed everything weeks ago." "Did she indeed?" I thought, but didn't say. Instead, "I'm sure it will get sorted out, James. These things usually do." "Mom, is there any chance you could come down here? Vanessa is getting really upset, and I need to call the guests to tell them we might be delayed. You're good at smoothing things over, and right now I could use the help." Oh, the irony. Now I was needed, not as a grandmother celebrating her grandson's milestone birthday, but as the fixer, the calm presence who could soothe ruffled feathers and navigate difficult situations. The woman who had been deemed too embarrassing to be seen by their important guests was suddenly essential when those guests might be disappointed. "I thought my presence would make the wrong impression on your important business contacts," I said, unable to keep a slight edge from my voice. "Mom, please." James sounded genuinely desperate. "Tyler's in tears. Vanessa's threatening to sue the museum, and I'm trying to keep everything from completely falling apart. Whatever issues we have, can we deal with them later? For Tyler's sake?" He had played the one card that was guaranteed to work with me. "For Tyler's sake. I'll be there in 20 minutes, I said, already reaching for my car keys. The drive to the museum was surreal. I knew exactly what I would find when I arrived. The carefully orchestrated consequences of Vanessa's dismissive treatment coming to fruition. Part of me felt guilty for the distress this would cause Tyler, but I reminded myself that the plan included safeguards to ensure his day would still be special. This was about teaching a necessary lesson to the adults, not punishing an innocent child. The museum parking lot was surprisingly full for a morning, with several cars I recognized as belonging to the important connections Vanessa had been so eager to impress. I parked in the spot reserved for major donors, a perk I'd never used before, preferring to remain anonymous in my support of the institution, and made my way to the grand entrance. Inside, the lobby was a scene of barely controlled chaos. To one side, a group of children in party clothes milled about uncertainly, parents checking watches and exchanging concerned glances. At the reception desk, Vanessa, resplendent in an expensive-looking cream dress and designer heels, was gesturing emphatically at a harried staff member. James stood nearby, phone to his ear, his free hand rubbing his temple in a gesture of stress I recognized from his childhood. And there, in the center of it all, was Tyler, clutching his new pocket watch and looking utterly miserable on what should have been one of the happiest days of his young life. I went to him first, kneeling down to envelop him in a hug that he returned with crushing force. "Grandma, everything's ruined," he whispered against my shoulder. "They say we can't have my dinosaur party in the special room anymore." "Nothing's ruined," I assured him, smoothing his hair. "Your birthday is going to be wonderful, I promise. Sometimes plans change, but that doesn't mean they can't still be magical." He pulled back, his eyes red-rimmed but hopeful. "Really?" "Really," I confirmed. "Now, why don't you show me that watch again? Is it keeping good time?" While Tyler proudly demonstrated his new treasure, I took in the scene around us more fully. Dr. Callahan, distinguished in a perfectly tailored suit, was speaking quietly with who I assumed were the Westbrooks, their expressions a mixture of confusion and mild irritation. Other guests stood in small clusters, children growing increasingly restless, parents checking the time with increasing frequency. James spotted me and hurried over, relief written across his features. "Mom, thank God. This is a complete disaster." "What exactly seems to be the problem?" I asked, rising to my feet but keeping a comforting hand on Tyler's shoulder. "Vanessa says she confirmed everything weeks ago, but the museum is claiming they never received final payment or signed contracts. They're saying the space was released from our hold when the deadline passed." He ran a hand through his hair, a nervous habit since childhood. "The only space they can offer us is a small classroom that would fit maybe half our guests, with no access to the exhibits Vanessa promised everyone." "I see," I said, my gaze moving to where Vanessa was now demanding. "To speak to the museum director." "And what does the events coordinator say?" "Some woman named Diane. She keeps insisting there's nothing she can do, that the system shows our reservation was never finalized." The frustration in his voice was palpable. "Vanessa's beside herself. She sent out these elaborate invitations, mentioning the behind-the-scenes fossil tour, the special dinosaur cake, everything. We've got the head of pediatrics here, the hospital board members she's been trying to connect with for months. It's a complete humiliation." Just then, Diane Levinson appeared from a side door, her professional demeanor firmly in place despite what I knew must be an uncomfortable situation for her. She scanned the lobby until her gaze fell on me, a flicker of recognition passing between us, before she approached our small group. "Mr. Sullivan?" She addressed James. "I've spoken with the director, and I'm afraid there's nothing more we can do about the space issue. Our records clearly show that while there was an initial inquiry about booking the dinosaur wing for today, the reservation was never confirmed, the deposit was never paid, and the contract was never signed." "That's impossible," James insisted. "My wife handled all the arrangements personally. She spoke with your office multiple times." "Yes, Ms. Reed did call several times," Diane acknowledged, using Vanessa's professional name. "But discussions are not the same as confirmations. Without payment and signed documentation, we cannot hold a space, especially one as popular as the dinosaur wing." Vanessa, having overheard this exchange, stormed over. "This is absolutely unacceptable," she fumed, her carefully applied makeup doing little to disguise the flush of anger on her cheeks. "Do you have any idea who is here? Today? Dr. Callahan has never accepted a private invitation before. The Westbrooks rearranged their schedule specifically for this event. My professional reputation is on the line." Diane remained admirably calm. "I understand your frustration, Ms. Reed, but the museum has strict policies about space reservations. Without confirmation, I did confirm," Vanessa nearly shouted, causing several nearby parents to turn and stare. "I spoke with someone in your office just last week about the catering menu." "Discussing details is not the same as confirming a reservation," Diane repeated patiently. "Our records show the initial inquiry was made in March, but despite multiple reminders from our office, the deposit was never received and the contract never returned." March. I watched James's expression shift as the date registered. March? He echoed. But Vanessa, you told me you just arranged this a few weeks ago, that your contact at the museum had offered us a special accommodation because of your pharmaceutical connection. Vanessa's composure slipped momentarily before she regained control. I did. This is clearly their mistake, not mine, and I expect it to be rectified immediately. Diane looked at her watch. We can offer you the classroom space, we discussed, with complimentary refreshments for your inconvenience. But the dinosaur wing is currently hosting another event that was properly confirmed months ago. This is ridiculous, Vanessa hissed. Who could possibly have priority over our reservation? I demand to know. And there it was. The opening I had been waiting for, though I'd hoped to handle this more privately for Tyler's sake. But Vanessa's insistence on answers in front of the assembled guests left little choice. I believe that would be me, I said quietly. Every head turned in my direction, James with confusion, Vanessa with dawning horror, and Diane with a carefully neutral expression that nevertheless couldn't quite hide her discomfort with the situation. What? Are you talking about, Mom? James asked. I took a deep breath. This was the moment of truth, literally and figuratively. I reserved the dinosaur wing for Tyler's birthday back in March. I arranged for the behind-the-scenes tour, the paleontologist, visit the special cake, all of it. Silence fell, heavy and absolute. Even the children seemed to sense the tension, their chatter dying away as the adults froze in a tableau of confusion and growing realization. That's not possible, Vanessa finally stammered. I was the one who contacted the museum. I was the one who planned all of this. No, Vanessa, I corrected gently. You weren't. I've been arranging and paying for the children's birthday celebrations since they were born, always anonymously, always happy to let you take the credit. But this year, when you decided I wasn't worthy of attending my own grandson's party, party I had created and funded, something had to change. James looked between us, bewilderment giving way to understanding and then to something like shame. Mom, is this true? You've been paying for all the kids' parties? I nodded. Everyone. The petting zoo for Sophia's 4th birthday. The magician for Tyler's 6th. The custom Star Wars costumes last year. All of it. But why didn't you say anything? He asked. Because it wasn't about recognition, I explained. It was about giving my grandchildren magical memories. I was content to stay in the background, to let you and Vanessa be the heroes in their eyes, until I was told my presence would embarrass you in front of your important guests. Vanessa had gone very pale, her gaze darting to where Dr. Callahan and the Westbrooks were listening with undisguised interest. Margaret, this isn't the place to discuss family matters, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. I agree, I said. It should have been discussed privately weeks ago. But when you decided to exclude me from my grandson's celebration, a celebration I arranged specifically to honor his love of science and his grandfather's memory, you made it impossible to resolve this quietly. Tyler, who had been following the adult conversation with growing confusion, tugged at my hand. Grandma, what's going on? Why is everyone upset? I knelt down to his level again, determined that he not become collateral damage in this necessary but painful confrontation. Nothing for you to worry about, sweetheart. Grown-ups sometimes have misunderstandings that they need to work out. But your special day is still going to happen. In fact, I looked up at Diane, who gave a slight, "School, I think Ms. Levinson might be ready to show us to the real party location now." Diane stepped forward, professional smile firmly in place. That's right, Tyler. Your grandmother arranged something very special in our new paleontology wing. Would you like to see it? Tyler's face lit up. Yes, please. Diane looked at the assembled guests. If everyone would please follow me, the Sullivan family's celebration will begin momentarily in the Richard Sullivan Memorial Wing. Another beat of stunned silence. James turned to me, his expression a mixture of confusion and dawning realization. The Richard Sullivan Memorial Wing? As in, your father? I confirmed quietly. I made a donation to the museum's expansion fund in his memory 3 years ago. The plaque is by the geology exhibit, his favorite section. I thought it would be a fitting place for Tyler's celebration, a way to connect him to the grandfather he never had the chance to meet. For the first time in years, I saw my son, truly saw him, not the ambitious accountant striving for status and connection, but the thoughtful boy who had adored his father, who had spent countless weekends in this very museum learning about the natural world, from a man who found wonder in the smallest details of existence. "Mom," he said, his voice thick with emotion, "I had no idea. All this time." "There's a lot you don't know," I said gently. "Things we should discuss, but not today. Today is about Tyler and making sure his 10th birthday is everything he dreamed it would be." The guests had begun to follow Diane toward the museum's east wing, children chattering excitedly, parents exchanging curious glances. Vanessa remained frozen in place, her carefully constructed narrative of social and professional success crumbling visibly around her. "What have you done?" she whispered, low enough that only I could hear. "I've reminded you that appearances aren't everything," I replied quietly. "And that treating family as disposable has consequences." With that, I turned to follow the group, Tyler's hand firmly in mine, leaving Vanessa and James to decide how they would proceed, with grace and humility, or with continued pretense. Their choice would determine much about our relationship moving forward. But for now, I had a grandson's birthday to celebrate. And somewhere, I felt certain, Richard was watching with that gentle smile that had always made me feel like the most valuable person in the world. Not for what I could provide or who I could impress, but simply for who I was. That, after all, was the greatest gift any family could give. Despite everything that had happened, Tyler's birthday party was a tremendous success. Children, after all, are wonderfully resilient and blissfully oblivious to adult tensions when there are dinosaur fossils to examine and birthday cake to anticipate. The Richard Sullivan Memorial Wing was everything I had hoped it would be when I made the donation years earlier. The interactive displays captivated the young guests, while the adults, including Dr. Callahan and the Westbrooks, seemed genuinely impressed by both the exhibits and the behind-the-scenes tour led by Dr. E. Whitaker, the paleontologist I'd flown in from Chicago. The cake, a detailed reconstruction of a dinosaur dig site, complete with edible fossils that could be excavated with miniature chocolate tools, was met with gasps of delight from the children and appreciative murmurs from the parents. Throughout it all, I remained in the background, allowing Tyler to be the center of attention, as any birthday child should be. James moved through the event in a daze, alternating between supervising activities and casting bewildered glances in my direction, as if seeing me for the first time in years. Perhaps in some ways, he was. Vanessa's reaction was more complex. After the initial shock of the revelation in the lobby, she had pulled herself together with remarkable composure, plastering on a smile that never quite reached her eyes as she guided guests to the wing that, until 20 minutes earlier, she hadn't known existed. She made a point of staying as far from me as possible, navigating the room in careful orbits that never brought us into direct contact. I didn't mind. This day wasn't about Vanessa or me or our complicated relationship. It was about Tyler, about honoring the curious, kind-hearted boy who shared so many of his grandfather's qualities despite never having met him. As the party wound down and guests began to depart, several of the important connections Vanessa had been so eager to impress made a point of seeking me out. "Mrs. Sullivan," Dr. Callahan said, extending his hand, "I want to thank you for an extraordinary afternoon. My son hasn't stopped talking about the fossil collection. And this wing is truly impressive, a fitting tribute to your husband. Thank you, I replied, accepting the handshake. Richard believed knowledge should be accessible to everyone, especially children. He would have loved seeing all these young minds engaged and excited today. Your grandson mentioned you owned Sullivan's Bakery, he continued. My wife and I used to drive across town every Sunday for your sourdough. Nothing else in Cleveland ever compared. I couldn't help but glance toward Vanessa, who was within earshot and visibly tensing at this revelation. The bakery she had been so determined to downplay was apparently a cherished memory for the very people she was trying to impress. That's very kind of you to say, I smiled. My former protégée Maria runs it now, but I'm pleased to say she's maintained our standards. More than maintained, he assured me. She credits you at every opportunity. There's a whole wall of photographs in the main shop documenting the bakery's history, with you at the center. The Sullivan Legacy, I believe it's called. I hadn't known this, hadn't visited the main location in over a year, giving Maria space to truly make the business her own. The thought that she had created a tribute to my work, that the legacy of Sullivan's Bakery lived on so visibly, brought unexpected tears to my eyes. I'll have to visit soon, I said. It's been too long. When you do, please say hello to Maria for me, and perhaps bring me one of those poppy seed rolls that got me through medical school. I'm sure she'd make them for the original Mrs. Sullivan. After Dr. Callahan moved on, Mrs. Westbrook approached, elegant in a tailored pantsuit that probably cost more than a month's revenue from my original bakery location. Margaret Sullivan, she said warmly, taking both my hands in hers. Why didn't James tell us his mother was the Margaret Sullivan, the woman who revolutionized artisanal baking in Northeast Ohio? I blinked in surprise. That might be giving me too much credit. Not at all. My husband and I are on the board of the Cleveland Culinary Institute. Your scholarship fund has helped dozens of young bakers establish careers. We've been trying to honor you at our annual gala for years, but could never get contact information. Another revelation, another instance of my quiet contributions being more visible and valued than I'd realized. And another moment of Vanessa's careful social calculations being turned upside down. That's very flattering, I said, genuinely moved. But the scholarship was established anonymously for a reason. The focus should be on the students and their work, not on me. Admirable, but perhaps reconsider for next year's gala? The theme is Cleveland's Culinary Pioneers, and you would be our guest of honor. She pressed a business card into my hand. Think about it. No pressure. As the last guests departed and the museum staff began clearing away the party decorations, I found myself alone with Tyler for a brief moment. He threw his arms around me, a fierce hug that conveyed more than words could. This was the best birthday ever, Grandma, he declared. And I knew you weren't really sick. Mom said you were, but you never miss my birthday. No, sweetheart, I wasn't sick, I confirmed, smoothing his hair back from his forehead. Sometimes grown-ups make mistakes in how they communicate. He looked at me with the penetrating insight children sometimes display. Mom didn't want you to come, did she? But you came anyway and saved the whole party. It's complicated, Tyler. But what matters is that you had a wonderful day. I did, he nodded solemnly. And I got to learn about Grandpa Richard, too. I never knew the museum had a whole section with his name on it. Mom and Dad never told me. They might not have known, I said diplomatically. Sometimes families don't share everything, even when they should. He fingered the pocket watch, which hadn't left his possession all day. I think Grandpa would have liked the party, especially the T-Rex skull. He would have loved it, I agreed, almost as much as he would have loved you. The drive home from the museum was solitary and quiet, giving me time to process the day's events. I had achieved what I set out to do, established boundaries, reclaimed my dignity, and ensured Tyler still had a memorable birthday. But the confrontation had also revealed painful truths about my relationship with James and Vanessa, fractures that would require time and effort to heal, if healing was even possible. I expected the fallout to begin immediately, anticipated angry phone calls or text messages demanding explanations. Instead, what followed was silence. A heavy, charged silence that stretched from Saturday evening through all of Sunday and into Monday morning. No calls from James, no texts from Vanessa, not even messages from the grandchildren, which hurt more than I wanted to admit. I had prepared myself for conflict, for recriminations and difficult conversations. I hadn't prepared for simply being frozen out. By Monday afternoon, I was beginning to wonder if I'd miscalculated, if in standing up for myself, I'd inadvertently severed the already tenuous connection to my son's family. The thought brought a wave of grief that surprised me with its intensity. I had been willing to risk tension, even temporary estrangement, but the idea of a permanent breach left me hollow. Then, as I was weeding my garden in the warm October sunshine, a car pulled into my driveway, James's car, without Vanessa or the children. He sat in the vehicle for several long moments before finally emerging, his movements hesitant, his expression guarded. I continued my gardening, giving him space to approach on his own terms, though, my heart hammered with apprehension. "Mom," he said when he finally reached me, his voice strained. "Can we talk?" I nodded, brushing soil from my gardening gloves. "Of course. Would you like some tea? I just made a fresh pot." He followed me inside, taking a seat at the kitchen table, the same table where he'd done homework as a child, where Richard had taught him to play chess, where countless family meals had been shared in simpler times. I poured 2 cups of tea and sat across from him, waiting. "I don't even know where to begin," he said finally, staring into his cup rather than meeting my eyes. Saturday was illuminating. "Yes," I agreed. "For everyone, I think." "Why didn't you tell me you were financing the children's parties all these years? Or that you'd donated enough to the museum to have a wing named after Dad? Or any of it?" The questions tumbled out, frustration and hurt evident in each one. I considered my answer carefully. At first, it was because I didn't want recognition. The joy was in seeing the children happy, in honoring your father's memory in a meaningful way. Later, I paused, seeking the right words. Later, it became clear that my contributions made Vanessa uncomfortable. That my background, my career, my heritage were things to be minimized rather than celebrated. It seemed easier to remain in the background. "That's not fair," James protested, though weakly. "Vanessa respects you." "Does she?" I asked gently. "Enough to include me in my own grandson's birthday celebration? Enough to acknowledge my role in creating the very event she was using to impress her colleagues?" He had no answer for that, his gaze dropping back to his untouched tea. "James," I continued, softening my tone, "I understand ambition. I built a successful business from nothing at a time when women weren't expected to be entrepreneurs. I understand wanting to create opportunities, to build networks. What I don't understand is doing it at the expense of family, of the people who love you, support you, cheer for your success, even when it takes you farther from them." "I never meant to pull away," he said quietly. "It just happened, gradually. One compromise at a time." "Yes," I nodded. "That's usually how it works. Small concessions that don't seem significant in isolation, until one day you look up and find yourself very far from where you started, and from who you intended to be." He finally met my eyes, his own suspiciously bright. "When Dr. Callahan told me how much he respected your business acumen, how he and his wife used to drive across town for your bread, I didn't know what to say. All this time, Vanessa and I have been embarrassed, I guess, by the bakery, trying to present ourselves as more sophisticated, more polished. And it turns out the very people we were trying to impress already admired you for exactly the things we were trying to hide. Life is full of such ironies, I said with a small smile. Success means different things to different people, James. True respect isn't earned by hiding who you are, but by embracing it with integrity. I know that. Or I used to. He ran a hand through his hair in that familiar gesture of stress. Dad would be so disappointed in me. No, I said firmly. Your father would understand. He would be sad. Sad that you felt your background wasn't good enough, that the life we provided somehow needed to be reinvented. But he would understand the pressure to belong, to achieve. He felt it too, in his own way. He did? Of course. Everyone does. But Richard found his way through it by remembering what truly mattered. Not impressing others, but being someone he himself could respect when he looked in the mirror each morning. James was quiet for a long moment, absently tracing the rim of his teacup with one finger. Vanessa is mortified, he finally said. She hasn't left the house since Saturday. Keeps saying her professional reputation is ruined. Is it? I asked. Or did she simply discover that the narrative she created, about me, about your background, about what impresses people like the Westbrooks, was inaccurate? Mrs. Westbrook called her yesterday, James admitted. Asked if Vanessa would connect her directly with you to discuss the Culinary Institute's gala. Said she was thrilled to discover the connection and hoped Vanessa wouldn't mind if they borrowed her mother-in-law for the event. I couldn't help but smile at the irony. And how did Vanessa respond? She said she'd be happy to put them in touch. Then went upstairs and cried for an hour. He sighed deeply. She's not a bad person, Mom. Just insecure in some ways. Desperate. To belong in circles that sometimes make her feel inadequate. I know she's not a bad person, I assured him. If she were, she wouldn't have captured your heart. But she made choices that were hurtful. Choices that reduced me to an embarrassing accessory rather than a person deserving of basic respect. I made those choices too, James admitted, by going along with it, by not standing up for you, by forgetting where I came from and who helped me get where I am. His acknowledgement, simple but profound, was the first step toward healing the rift between us. Not excuses, not defensiveness, but genuine recognition of his role in what had transpired. The children keep asking when they can see you, he continued, especially Tyler. He's been telling everyone at school that his grandmother saved his birthday and that she's secretly important to the whole city. I laughed at that description. Secretly important captured the contradiction of my life rather perfectly. I'd love to see them any time. My door is always open to my grandchildren. And to me? He asked hesitantly. Is there a path forward? For all of us? I reached across the table to cover his hand with mine. Family is complicated, James. We hurt each other. We make mistakes. We fall short of who we want to be. But family is also resilient. With honesty and genuine effort, most wounds can heal. And Vanessa? She's afraid you'll never forgive her. Forgiveness isn't the issue, I said thoughtfully. I forgave her the moment I saw her face in the museum lobby, when she realized what had happened. What matters now is change. Real change in how she treats me, in how she speaks about me to others and to the children. I won't go back to being the convenient grandmother who's trotted out when needed and hidden away when inconvenient. That's fair, he nodded. More than fair, considering everything. We talked for another hour, clearing the air about many things that had been left unspoken for too long. James shared his insecurities about measuring up to his more privileged colleagues, about providing opportunities for his children that he hadn't had. I spoke of my hurt at being gradually erased from family narratives, at watching my heritage, and accomplishments being treated as liabilities rather than sources of pride. It was messy and occasionally painful, but also cleansing, like lancing a wound that had been allowed to fester for far too long. Before he left, James asked the question I had been expecting since the revelation at the museum. So, the money. From the bakery sale, it was significantly more than you let on? Yes, I acknowledged. The business had grown more valuable than most people realized. The property alone, given Cleveland's revitalization, was worth a small fortune. And you never said anything. Never changed your lifestyle or anything. I didn't need to change my lifestyle, I explained. I've always had everything I need. A comfortable home, good health, work that fulfilled me, family that I love. Financial security simply meant freedom from worry, not a need for luxury or status. All those years helping us with childcare, with the kids' expenses. He shook his head, realization continuing to dawn. We treated you like you needed our charity, offering you a place at our table, acting like we were doing you a favor, when all along I was exactly who I've always been, I finished for him. A woman who built something meaningful, with her own hands, who raised a son she's proud of despite his recent missteps, who finds joy in her grandchildren's happiness. The money doesn't change who I am, James. It just gave me options when I needed them. Like the option to teach Vanessa and me a necessary lesson, he said, a hint of his father's wry humor finally breaking through. Exactly like that, I agreed, with a smile. Sometimes the kindest thing we can do for those we love is to hold them accountable. He hugged me before leaving, a real hug, not the perfunctory embrace that had become our norm in recent years. I'm sorry, Mom, he whispered. For everything, we'll do better. I know you will, I said, and meant it. The weeks that followed brought gradual but meaningful changes. Vanessa sent a handwritten letter of apology, formal and still somewhat stiff, but sincere in its acknowledgement of her behavior and its impact. The children visited more frequently, often dropped off by James for afternoons of baking or gardening, or simply being together without the pressure of performance or appearance. Vanessa herself took longer to reappear, her pride and embarrassment, creating a barrier that needed time to erode. When she finally came, almost a month after the birthday revelation, it was with a tentative olive branch, a gift certificate to a spa she frequented, along with an invitation to lunch to discuss the Culinary Institute Gala. Our relationship would never be warm or effortless. We were too different, our values too divergent for easy connection. But we found a new equilibrium based on mutual respect, genuine respect, not the performative deference she had shown when she thought me useful but unimportant. The most profound change, however, was within me. Standing up for myself after years of quiet accommodation was liberating in ways I hadn't anticipated. I accepted Mrs. Westbrook's invitation to be honored at the culinary gala, embracing public recognition of my contributions to Cleveland's food culture after decades of working behind the scenes. I reconnected with Maria at Sullivan's Bakery, touched beyond words by the wall of photographs documenting our shared history, by the recipes that continued to bear my name, by the legacy that lived on in every loaf and pastry. And I began, at long last, to indulge in some of the experiences I'd deferred for so long. I booked that trip to Tuscany I'd been dreaming of for decades. Not alone this time, but with Charlotte, my oldest friend from baking school, and her wife, Eleanor. 3 weeks exploring hillside villages, learning traditional bread-making techniques from Italian nonnas, savoring wine from small family vineyards as the Mediterranean sun set over ancient stone walls. When I returned, tanned and rejuvenated, I found a request waiting from Tyler's science teacher. Would I be willing to visit his class to discuss traditional baking chemistry? Apparently, my grandson had been telling everyone about the scientific precision his grandmother had applied to developing the perfect sourdough recipe, about how she had been experimenting with fermentation before it was cool. I accepted, immediately. The classroom visit became a monthly occurrence, not just to Tyler's class but to the entire 5th grade, then expanding to include Sophia's 2nd grade group as well. We conducted simple experiments demonstrating how yeast works, how different flours affect texture, how temperature changes the development of gluten strands. Basic food science wrapped in the sensory pleasure of creating something delicious. "My grandmother is teaching the whole school about bread," Tyler announced proudly during a Sunday dinner at my house, a new tradition we had established, replacing the increasingly tense meals at James and Vanessa's with relaxed gatherings around my kitchen table. "Even Principal Reeves comes to watch. He says she's a community treasure." Vanessa, who had gradually begun participating in these dinners, nodded with what appeared to be genuine appreciation. "The Westbrooks mentioned your school visits at the hospital fundraiser last week. Apparently, their granddaughter is in Tyler's class and hasn't stopped talking about the bread experiments. They were quite impressed." There was no edge to her comment, no calculation, just a straightforward acknowledgement of something positive. Progress, small but significant. "Maybe Mom could do something similar for your company picnic," James suggested. "You mentioned they're looking for activities that are both educational and engaging." 6 months earlier, such a suggestion would have been unthinkable. Vanessa would never have considered highlighting her mother-in-law's baking background at a corporate event. Now, she actually seemed to consider it. "That's not a bad idea," she said thoughtfully. "The theme is back to basics this year, traditional crafts and skills. It might be perfect, actually." "I'd be happy to help," I offered, meaning it. "Though I should warn you, I don't do condensed versions. If we're going to teach bread making, we're going to do it properly. 3 hours minimum." "Even better," Vanessa surprised me by saying. "Most of these corporate activities are over too quickly. Something substantive would be a nice change." As I looked around my table, James relaxed and engaged, Vanessa gradually finding her authentic self rather than the carefully constructed persona she'd maintained for so long, the children animated, and happy in the presence of family who truly saw them. I felt a profound sense of peace. The path to this moment had been neither straight nor easy. It had required courage I wasn't sure I possessed, honesty that was painful for everyone involved, and the willingness to risk what I valued most, my connection to my family, in order to preserve my sense of self-worth. But the rewards had been worth it. Not just the external changes in how I was treated, but the internal shift in how I saw myself. No longer the convenient grandmother relegated to the background, but a woman of substance and value, deserving of respect not despite my history, but because of it. That night, after everyone had gone home and the house was quiet, I sat in Richard's old armchair and looked at our wedding photograph on the mantel. "Well, old man," I said to his smiling image, "it took me long enough, but I finally figured it out. Better late than never, right?" I could almost hear his gentle laugh, feel his hand on my shoulder in that comforting way he had. Richard had always seen me clearly. My strength, my worth, my capacity for more than I believed possible. It had taken 73 years, a dramatic confrontation, and the willing sacrifice of comfort for principle. But at last, I had learned to see myself the same way. The baker's daughter from a working-class Cleveland neighborhood. The woman who built a business with her own hands. The widow who carried on with grace and purpose. The grandmother who stood her ground when it mattered most. All of these were me, Margaret Sullivan, in my complete, undiminished self. And now, finally, the world could take me as I was, or not at all. As it turned out, they chose to take me as I was, and discovered perhaps to their surprise that I was more than enough. A full year has passed since that fateful birthday party at the museum, and what a transformative year it's been. If you had told me then how much would change, for me, for my family, for my sense of self, I'm not sure I would have believed you. Today is Tyler's 11th birthday, and we're celebrating it in my newly renovated kitchen. A space designed specifically for teaching and sharing the baking traditions that have defined so much of my life. The renovation was my gift to myself after the Tuscany trip, a long overdue indulgence that has become the heart of a surprising new chapter in my story. "Grandma, is the dough supposed to feel this sticky?" Tyler asks, his hands covered in flour as he works the bread we're making together. "That's perfect," I assure him, guiding his technique with gentle hands. "You want it tacky but not wet. See how it's starting to develop that elastic quality? That's the gluten forming." Sophia sits at the counter nearby, meticulously decorating cookies with royal icing, her artistic precision evident in every careful stroke. At 8, she's already showing remarkable talent for detail work. "Mom's going to be so impressed with these," she says, carefully outlining a perfect star. "She said her boss loves your sugar cookies." That casual comment, "Mom's going to be so impressed," represents one of the most profound changes in our family dynamic. Vanessa, who once tried to minimize any connection to my bakery background, now proudly tells colleagues about her mother-in-law's culinary expertise. The woman who couldn't bring herself to mention Sullivan's Bakery at dinner parties now brings my homemade bread to office potlucks, sharing the story of its Ukrainian origins without hesitation. The transformation wasn't immediate, of course. For several weeks after the museum revelation, Vanessa avoided me entirely, her pride too wounded for direct interaction. But necessity is a powerful motivator, and when several of her important business connections began asking specifically about me, about the bakery, about my techniques, about whether I might consider teaching a class, she found herself in the uncomfortable position of needing the very connection she had tried to sever. Her first overture came in the form of a text message. "Dr. Callahan's wife is wondering if you would share your sourdough starter recipe. Apparently, they've been trying to recreate it since the bakery changed hands." It was a small thing, but significant, an acknowledgement that what I had created had value, that my expertise was worth seeking out. I responded warmly, offering not just the recipe but to show Dr. Callahan's wife the technique in person if she was interested. That led to an afternoon in my kitchen with not just Mrs. Callahan, but 3 other women from Vanessa's social circle, all eager to learn the bread-making skills I'd perfected over decades. Vanessa hovered at the edges of that gathering, visibly uncomfortable, but gradually drawn into the warm, flour-dusted camaraderie that seems to naturally form when people create food together. "I had no idea there was so much science to it," she admitted as we cleaned up afterward, the other women having departed with freshly baked loaves and bubbling sourdough starters. "The way you explained the fermentation process was fascinating." I wasn't quite an apology, but it was an opening, a small crack in the wall of pretension she had built between us. From there, brick by brick, that wall began to come down. James, for his part, embraced the reconciliation with characteristic thoroughness. Once he acknowledged his role in sidelining me, he seemed determined to make amends in every possible way. Sunday dinners at my house became a sacred tradition. He began bringing the children for overnight visits twice a month, giving Vanessa and himself a break while allowing me uninterrupted time with my grandchildren. Most meaningfully, he took a genuine interest in the bakery legacy, visiting Sullivan's with Tyler to see the wall of photographs, asking questions about the early days, the struggles, the triumphs I had experienced while building the business that had funded his education and comfortable childhood. "I never really understood what you accomplished," he confessed during one such conversation. "Creating something from nothing, supporting us single-handedly after Dad died. I took it all for granted." "Most children do," I told him, without resentment. "It's the natural order of things. Parents provide, children receive. The understanding and appreciation come later, if at all." "I'm just glad I figured it out before it was too late," he said, and I knew he was thinking of his father, of all the things left unsaid between them when Richard's heart failed so suddenly, in that sunlit garden. The most unexpected development of the past year, however, has been my own journey. After decades of putting everyone else's needs before my own, of defining myself primarily through my roles as mother and grandmother, I have discovered, or perhaps rediscovered, my identity as an individual with talents, interests, and yes, ambitions of my own. It began with that Culinary Institute gala, where I reluctantly agreed to be honored for my contributions to Cleveland's food scene. Standing at that podium, accepting recognition for work I had always considered simply what I do, something shifted in my perspective. The proud faces of my grandchildren in the audience, James's undisguised emotion, even Vanessa's newfound respect, all of it crystallized into a moment of clarity. I wasn't just a grandmother who used to bake. I was Margaret Sullivan, master baker, entrepreneur, mentor to dozens of young culinary professionals throughout Cleveland. That identity hadn't disappeared when I sold the business. It had simply been tucked away, like sourdough starter in the refrigerator, dormant, but still very much alive. The speaking engagements that followed the gala took me by surprise. Requests from culinary schools, business organizations, even the local TEDx event, all wanting to hear about my journey as a female entrepreneur. In a time when that was far from common. At 74, I found myself with a suddenly vibrant professional life, sharing wisdom accumulated over decades with audiences hungry for authenticity and practical insight. "You're becoming quite the celebrity," Vanessa remarked one Sunday, without the edge that would have colored such a comment a year earlier. "The children's friends have started asking for your autograph when they come over for baking lessons." Baking lessons, perhaps the most joyful development of all. What began as classroom visits expanded into weekend workshops for children and their parents, hosted here in my newly renovated kitchen. Twice a month, I welcome families into my home to learn the basics of bread and pastry, to experience the tactile pleasure of working with dough, to connect across generations through the simple act of creating food together. Vanessa, to everyone's surprise, including her own, has become a regular participant. Her initial stiffness gradually gave way to genuine interest and eventually to real skill. Last month, she brought a perfectly executed babka to an office function and proudly announced it was made from my mother-in-law's Ukrainian family recipe, passed down through generations. The phrase, "my mother-in-law," no longer carries that slight intonation of embarrassment or obligation. Now it's simply a statement of relationship, sometimes even spoken with a hint of pride. As Tyler shapes his loaf with increasing confidence, and Sophia puts the finishing touches on her cookies, I reflect on how differently this birthday is unfolding compared to last year's drama. Today we'll celebrate with a simple family gathering here at my home. Tomorrow there will be a larger party at the trampoline park with Tyler's school friends. Both celebrations acknowledge different aspects of who he is and what he enjoys, without pretense or social calculation. "Grandma," Tyler says, looking up, from his bread dough with flour dusting his cheeks. "Can we do this every birthday? Make bread together, I mean. Even when I'm like super old, like 20 or something?" "Absolutely, I promise, my heart full. For as many birthdays as you want, for as long as I'm able. The true gift of this past year hasn't been the recognition or the new opportunities, welcome though they've been. It's been the authenticity, the freedom to be fully myself, to be valued for who I actually am, rather than who someone else thinks I should be. And in claiming that freedom for myself, I've somehow helped my family discover their own authentic selves as well. Sometimes the greatest act of love is standing firm in your truth, even when it creates temporary discomfort. Sometimes the most valuable gift you can give your family is the courage to be seen, fully seen, for exactly who you are. So that's my story, how canceling a venue I secretly paid for taught my family the true value of respect. Sometimes in life, you have to be willing to disrupt the peace to create real harmony. You have to be brave enough to be seen, fully seen, even when it's uncomfortable. If you're watching this and finding yourself gradually erased from your own family narrative, remember, it's never too late to reclaim your place. Not with anger or vengeance, but with clarity and the quiet confidence that comes from knowing your own worth. I'm Margaret Sullivan, baker, businesswoman, mother, grandmother. And these days, everyone knows exactly who I am. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.